Hi guys, with the recent release of the Sony A6700, it is clear that the Sony APS-C line is stronger than ever. This is a fantastic time to be a Sony APS-C shooter. There are so many great lens options available. So in this video, I will break down my top 5 lenses that I like to use for the Sony APS-C system, and especially now this new Sony A6700. And if you stay to the end, I will give you a bonus lens that you can chew on, for the algorithm. Let's talk about it. So obviously the A6700 is the new kid in town, but this list will apply to any Sony APS-C camera, obviously. Like little Dougie here, the ZV-E10, or the FX30, or the A6400. You get the drift. But let's start with my favorite wide-angle lens for the Sony APS-C system. This is great for not only landscape photos, but also if you are doing vlogging. A lot of people these days like to do the content creation and hold the camera at arm's length. Well, you're going to need this guy right here. In my humble opinion, this is the Sony 11mm 1.8. Such a fantastic lens. If you're someone who likes doing the walking and talking and the vlogging, this is your lens here. Also, if you like doing architecture, real estate photography or videography, and also really wide shots of landscapes and even astrophotography, this 1.8 with this very wide field of view will be a great lens for you. This is definitely my #1 recommended vlogging lens. Now, another wide angle lens that you can definitely vlog with, but I think of it more as a photography lens, is the wide angle zoom from Tamron, the 11-20 f2.8. That 2.8, while not 1.8 like the Sony 11, 2.8 is still pretty good at letting in a fair amount of light to your sensor, and to have that zoom range at that wide angle, absolutely a fantastic lens to use, especially I find for photography. You can definitely use it for videography as well. That 2.8 will let you do that. So if you're looking for a wide angle zoom, the Tamron 2.8, in my opinion, is the way to go. Now, when it comes to my favorite studio lens, a lens like this, to have this type of field of view, I am about 2 feet away from the camera. This is a 24mm on full frame, so you'd be looking for somewhere around a 16mm on the APS-C when you factor in that 1.5 times crop if you want this same type of field of view. And for me, to have a great studio lens that also you can do interviews, talking head things like that, you have two choices. You have the Sony 15mm f1.4 or the Sigma 16mm f1.4. Now, the Sony 15 costs a fair bit more than the Sigma, almost twice as much, I believe, but this lens does have an aperture ring, and it has a switch for autofocus to manual focus, and it has a focus hole button that you can reprogram to other things. But I think most importantly, the advantage this has over this Sigma is that when it comes to stabilization, when you are using the electronic, the active stabilization in the Sony cameras, it jives better with the actual native Sony lenses. So if you are going to be hand-holding your camera and you're going to be out in the wild and you want to use the active stabilization, then I think the 15mm from Sony f1.4 is the best choice out of these two. But if what you're going to do is put this on a tripod and set it up in a studio, you don't need the aperture ring, the buttons and switches, and you also don't mind that it weighs a nice bit more than the Sony 15. It's also a fair bit bigger, but that doesn't matter if it's over there on the tripod. The optical quality of this guy is equal to the 15 for sure. So I have used this for years on many different camera brands. It is overall my favorite lens because it is budget friendly, yet it gives quality that basically rivals this 24mm G Master lens. I absolutely love this. So if you don't need the extra stabilization buttons and switches of this guy, do this one. So this will count as one lens recommendation. Either get the 15 or get the 16, depending on your budget and your needs. Now, when it comes to portraiture, we have a brand new lens to add into the mix. Previously, I used to say the Sigma 56mm f1.4 is the best portrait lens that you can buy for the Sony APS-C system, and it is still an absolutely excellent lens. And if you want that 85mm traditional portrait type of view, the Sigma 56mm 85mm full frame field of view, I should say. So the 56mm on the Sigma 1.4 is going to give you wonderful images. I love it very much. However, Viltrox has just announced the 75mm f1.2 for the Sony E-mount system, and this has become my favorite portrait lens of all time for the APS-C system. I can't believe how 1.2, and it focuses great, and you get that crazy blurry background if you want it. It lets in so much light, so in low light conditions, fantastic. This Viltrox, I haven't even reviewed it yet on the channel. That's how new this is. That review is coming up, but suffice it to say, an absolutely fantastic portrait lens, and definitely my go-to from now on. It is a nice bit bigger than the Sigma 56, and of course it's tighter, so you'll have to stand further back from your subject. But to me, if you have the room to shoot, oh boy, this thing. So now let's talk about an all-purpose zoom. You're going somewhere, you don't know what you're going to capture, maybe at many different focal lengths. You want to take one lens. The one lens I would recommend is probably the Tamron 17-70 f2.8. That is just a really big range. It's 17 to 70. It also has optical stabilization in the lens. Now, there is another all-purpose zoom that I love very much. That is the Sigma 18-50 f2.8, which is a lot smaller than the Tamron and a little bit cheaper. So, but it only goes 18 to 50 as opposed to 17 to 70, and it doesn't have optical stabilization. However, the Sigma does have macro capabilities. So if you're into macro photography, that would be a selling point for sure for the Sigma. So I don't think you can go wrong with either of those lenses. If you want the Sigma 18-50 for its portability and its size, its price, and its macro capabilities, but if you want to cover a long range and have optical stabilization, you don't mind a little bit of extra size, the Tamron 17-70 f2.8 for the all-purpose zooms. But what about you people who shoot wildlife photography or sports from a distance? You are going to need a good telephoto lens, and I would recommend the Sony 70-350G lens. It is an optically stabilized lens, and at 350, if you factor in the 1.5 times crop factor, you get a 525mm field of view. I use this lens a lot when I was testing the A6700, and I absolutely love it. You can get things from such far off in the distance, and it is a great lens to use for sports photographers and wildlife photographers. And now let's talk about that bonus lens I mentioned at the beginning, and we're going to talk about another Viltrox lens. Viltrox are making fantastic lenses these days. They are becoming a premier lens company. Do not miss the boat on Viltrox. This is the 13mm f1.4, and it is such a fantastic lens to go in between something that's extremely wide angle and also a studio lens. So I have used this in the studio. You can also use it for vlogging. You can use it for astrophotography, for landscape photography. Now for me, I prefer the 15 or the 16 for the studio shot that get this type of field of view. I find a 13 is a tiny bit too wide for my studio, but I know a lot of people do love the 13 in the studio. And when it comes to vlogging, it is a little bit tighter than the 11mm, but let's just say instead of buying the Sony 11 and the Sony 15 or Sigma 16, you just could afford one lens to bridge the gap. Definitely the Viltrox 13mm f1.4. It's one of my favorite lenses. I absolutely love it. So if there are other APS-C lenses that you love, please write them in the comments below so that we can all benefit from your knowledge and we can have a nice little discussion about it. Thanks for watching this. We'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.